Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Adobe Live, and I'm your host, Chris Blackstock. And you can join our Adobe Live community. Just subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us at Adobe Live on Instagram for the latest streams, updates, and more. Hello, chat. Hello, Wade. Moderating today, I see we can get some puns and some dad jokes in today. Clever Devlin. Hello, Oliver Andrews, Alessandra Lopez. Good to see everybody. Uma Korn. Always nice to have everybody in the chat and joining us today. And please, as always, let us know where you're coming from. This is international, so it's always nice to hear where everybody's watching this from. And today we're doing photography in Lightroom, and we have with us Bea Lubas,
Hi.
an incredible food
So excited.
photographer. Yes, and so let's just hop in. Please explain a little bit about yourself, show us a little bit of your work, and let's get rolling on what we're going to do today.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm super excited. My name is Bea Lubas. I am a Polish-born, England-based food photographer. I'm also author of How to Photograph Food, a book with tips and tricks on how to create appetizing photos of food. And I'm just super excited about today's Lightroom session. I honestly love digging deeper into the topic of food photography. So we have quite a few photos to take a look at today. So some of them are here. So some of those images that you can see on the screen are unedited. So we will be diving into there and create something a little bit more poppy and more interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, it's actually fun to kind of see. I know it's hard as an artist to kind of see some of your unfinished work out there, but as a fellow creative, it's always great seeing part of that process. So yeah, it's beautiful. So
Thank you.
yeah, so what are we going to be doing today? I know we're talking about creating moods and telling stories. So what's going to be the process today?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'm just gonna walk you through my thought process and really the things that I pay attention to. We're gonna explore some of my favorite techniques and Lightroom tools. So I will share some of the examples of like different moods and then the things that I pay attention to when I create those different styles. I really want us to like take a look at a few things that we can do to maybe create more engaging photos of food, as well as how to shape the light with masking and, to add a little bit of magic there, or really to draw the attention to important elements or, to our main subject. So I also want to explore the masking and how we would use it to apply different set of adjustments to our subject and a different set of adjustment to our background, and why and when we would do that. We'll play with color, of course, because it is food photography. So we'll play with color. I'll share with you some color techniques that I use in my work a lot. And we'll also jump into Lightroom Mobile.
Awesome. Well, excited to get going here.
Yeah, so a lot going on.
Yeah. We've got plenty of time, don't we?
Yeah, cool. Do you want me to start?
Oh yeah.
Shall I
So
just...
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please. Let's
Sorry.
just jump right in. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So maybe the very first thing I should mention is just like share a few different moods and just some of the things that I pay attention to. And, I guess everybody's interpretation like will be different. So I will just walk you through my thought process and how I kind of think about food photography and different styles in food photography. So the very first thing that I kind of think about when it comes to mood and creating different feelings in images is color psychology. So like how different colors kind of affects the feeling of the photograph. So that could be photos on the warmer side, that could be photos on the cooler side. So color psychology and basically how different colors make us feel and what kind of feeling they create in a photograph. Then the second thing I kind of pay attention to is tonal contrast. So here I kind of think of tonal contrast as when we have higher tonal contrast, the photos are kind of a little bit more energetic. That's kind of how I think about it. And then when we have lower tonal contrast, the image is a little bit softer, a little bit more delicate. And the same comes to the color contrast. So if we have like higher color contrast, then of course the image will be more energetic. And then when we have like lower tonal contrast in the image, color contrast in the image again feels like a little bit softer, delicate. So it's not really a rule in my photography, but what I really, really enjoy and love is to kind of use those techniques and match them with the food that I am photographing and then editing. And to give you a couple of examples, again, I'll just walk you through a couple of the examples that I show and a couple more. So this one, a warmer image, so works really well with like comforting food or maybe warmer types of seasons, right? So we're thinking maybe autumn or something like that.
Right.
Then the cooler images, so kind of give that refreshing vibe, work really well with refreshing food. Then lower tonal contrast, so really soft and delicate, works really well with any type of food that have like very delicate and soft texture. So thinking sponge cakes, for example.
Right, right.
And another example, this particular example with the lower color contrast, again, much more softer, much more delicate, works really well with food that kind of has that delicate, soft texture or flavor. And then on the higher end, so on the higher tonal contrast or higher color contrast, much more vibrant, much more eye-catching image, and at the same time works really well with anything that kind of has a little bit more flavor maybe, or like, you know, to me, oranges or like citrus are about that burst of flavor, so that kind of works.
Nice to have that high contrast with it.
Yeah, it works really well. Or like in this example, you know, so anything really fruity, any type of food that is kind of vibrant or has like a stronger flavor, in my opinion, works really well with like higher tonal contrast and higher color contrast. So this is not really a strict rule, but I really like when this kind of colors and tonality works with the type of food that I am photographing.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. And it's funny as a viewer, sometimes things work and you don't understand why, right? And with food, there is such a psychological effect on us when we're staring at food. And there really is it's a whole different world, because not only are you trying to take a beautiful photograph and make it, but you're also trying to add that part of it. It's like, what attracts us to these foods as well? And like, it's something, what's it gonna, you know, how is this gonna make this look inviting to us or delicious or all these things that other parts of photography or art, like, you don't necessarily have that job. So food photography is so interesting to me. And it's, I like that you brought up first the psychology of color, because as humans, when we go to, you know, look at food, eat food, all those things, we're already processing that without really knowing it. So it's really interesting to kind of see these photos and see how you're starting to think about it. But
yeah, and I'm glad you've mentioned that, because, you know, I have noticed that as a food photographer, what I have been doing really, because there are so many decisions also, right, to make as photographers, like what kind of colors kind of work with this food, and then what background, and maybe what ceramics to pick, and then what angle. There are quite a few decisions that we need to make when we create the image. So the very first question that I like to ask myself is, what is special about this food? What is interesting? Like, what makes it delicious? And what is important for my viewer to know about? So a viewer, the person who will be looking at the photograph. Because at the end of the day, when I'm photographing, the viewer, the person who will be looking at the photos, is not here with me. They can't try the food, they can't taste the flavors, they can't smell the delicious aroma. So really, it's my job as a photographer to show and share all those important details.
Yeah, it's exciting. I don't know, because food is exciting, you know, and it's so to kind of see it from a different angle. Like you said, I'm trying to experience that food just through a photograph. and it kind of brings up
Mm.
all these other psychological triggers and things that are happening. It's like, oh, I love strawberries, and I love, it's like
Yeah.
I'm already having a feeling about that just by seeing the food itself. And then to see how you can impact that with all of your colors and the staging and lighting.
Yeah.
um,
And so
Very
much
cool.
of it also happens in Lightroom. And if we start editing, this would be a really good example. I mean, if we look at this photograph, very low color contrast, right? So mainly warmer colors, well, mainly all warmer colors.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a really good, so this is a really good indicator of what it reflects is the kind of season, like the comfort of the winter season. So the colors kind of work in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
But I really want to add a little bit more energy to that photograph. So I feel like, to me, like I've mentioned in the previous photograph, citrus fruit are about that burst of flavor. They are about that energy. So I really would like to add more energy to this photograph. And during the creative process, I kind of already started working on this. So I photographed this with a backlighting technique. So that kind of adds a little bit of energy to the image. And then when I think about what makes this particular subject, this particular ingredient delicious, it's very simple. It's the juiciness, right? So I think if anybody ever tried like dry oranges, you will kind of know that, they kind of miss that juiciness, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you already see I worked on that, and there are some like spills on the board, and the way the oranges are cut and they kind of catch the highlights kind of show that
Mm-hmm.
juiciness here. So now we want to take it further, and like start editing it and like add a little bit more energy and focus on that juiciness of this fruit. So I'll go
um
ahead. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Wade was asking, there's a question from YouTube
Sure.
asking, can we see before and after photos? So
Yes,
I'm assuming,
sure.
yeah, we'll be doing that right throughout the streams, kind of seeing the altered version of it, and then what it looked like beforehand.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is always something I'm curious about too. So I'm
Mhm.
glad people want to see the before and after. So this is the before. So that has not been edited yet.
Right.
So that's something we are going to do next. And then I'll share what it looked like before and what it looks like after.
And as you're doing this, I'm curious, how much do you have to do? Like, do you have an idea of, when you go to stage this, like, okay, I need to do this amount of things with the staging, and then the rest I can do in Lightroom? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you kind of balance that of like what I need to do digitally and what I need to do, on the actual staging of the shot?
Mm-hmm. It is so interesting because I think about Lightroom during the staging process already.
Right.
So I often intentionally do certain things when I kind of place things around, because I know certain things that I can do in Lightroom. And there will be a really great example later on where I can kind of explain how I was thinking
Okay.
of Lightroom when I was photographing that ingredient. So
Awesome.
there is an example which I think is maybe not the next one, but I will mention about it. So definitely, it's kind of, I feel like it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you kind of keep editing in mind as you create
Yeah.
with your camera. Mm-hmm. So I'll go ahead and I'll start because I want to add a little bit more energy. So I will be working on the tonal contrast in this image. So I'll go to the light panel. I'll go to the point curve. The first thing I'm going to do is just like lift the end of the curve very, very slightly. And then I'm going to darken the shadows quite a bit. I mean, the next, I'm going to lift the midtones quite a bit. And I know it kind of looks really shocking right now.
Right. Right.
So I'm working on that tonal contrast. I mean, that's definitely too much. So I'm going to bring the point curve down in this part and just work on the midtones a little bit more. And now this is like a really energetic photo now, but it's definitely way, way too much. I might lift the shadows a little bit. And whenever I work on a tonal contrast, of course, when we work on like deepening the shadows, what happens then is the saturation of the colors go up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always something I will need to adjust after adding the tonal contrast, because the colors kind of start being way too saturated for the type of look I'm going for. So what's really interesting, in the past, I had to go to the color panel and like change the saturation here, and then go back to the point curve panel, adjust if I needed, and again, go back to the saturation slider if I needed to readjust that again. And now with the new feature that Lightroom offers, is we have the refined saturation in the point curve. So this is really like making my process so much easier and simplified. So you can actually see, I can refine that saturation right here.
You don't have to open up another window. It's already there for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it just makes things much simpler and easier, because I can just then adjust the point curve any more if I want to. So I'm just going to go ahead and readjust this to about, I guess, 70. And at this point, I can show you, this is the before, this is the after. So it is a change, but at the same time, in the raw file, we really missing that color, right? So we now have a little bit more color, and it kind of looks like what, you know, it is much more vibrant. And it is interesting because whenever I edit my photos, what I also like to do is basically, once the images are edited, I like to leave them for a bit. So I will, if I can, I will leave them for a day or two. If I can't, I leave them for half an hour, and then like just like close the screens and then get back in half an hour and look at the photos with fresh eyes again. And then I kind of know if something is overdone or underdone, because that sometimes happens too, when you're like, oh, actually, I can push it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it is interesting.
Yeah. Which, I mean, creating anything, right? It's like stepping back is so important, because sometimes you don't have somebody else's eyes to do that for you. You have to do it yourself and kind of reset. That's, yeah, very smart.
Yeah, that's very true. But I'm at this point, even though I haven't had a break from this image yet, I'm kind of happy with what this looks like at this moment. So it is, I'm kind of like adding this energy there. And like I said, the warmer colors really kind of reflect the coziness of the winter season when this fruit is actually available. And then I'm just adding a little bit more energy to it with the tonal contrast. I do want to go to the color panel though. There is not a lot of color adjustments I want to do in this particular image. But there is a little bit of red in this subject. And I really feel like it is an important detail, because it kind of tells us what type of orange it is. So I really want to kind of highlight that a little bit more. So again, going back to what makes that subject interesting, you know, what my viewers should know about. So I do want to go to the red, to the color mixer, to the red color. I'll go to the luminance and I will just darken it very slightly, not too much. So it's not going to be a huge change. But I kind of see that the red is a little bit more prominent, and that's something I wanted to go for. And then I'll go with the hue slightly more towards magenta. At this moment, I'm quite happy with what the oranges look like the orange color look like. So I'm going to leave it, and I'll just go to the color grading, and I will see if maybe we can infuse it with a little bit more warmth. So I'll go to the color grading, and I'll start with the shadows. And what I like to do when I work with the color grading is basically click anywhere kind of in the middle of the circle. So I'll just like click somewhere in the middle of the circle. So saturation around, 40, 50, maybe even like 30. And then I click and hold on the command key, and it kind of shows me that circle. So what it does, it basically allows me to kind of move around that color wheel, but only changing the hue. It doesn't change the saturation. So what it helps me with, it kind of helps me when I kind of do this, I'm kind of looking for what color feels right to me. And I like to do it at a lower saturation rather than 100, because to me, that's like, I don't know which color looks good here. It's a little bit for me too intense. So I like to do it at a lower saturation, but not too low at the same time, because then you are not able to see much of a change. So I kind of start somewhere in the middle, press and hold the command key, and just move around the circle. And looking for the color that kind of feels right for this image, like infuse it with something. So here I kind of feel it's something in between orange and red. So I'm gonna go ahead and like leave it around here. I do feel it's a little bit too strong, the saturation, which is 43 at the moment. So I'm gonna click and hold, and then what that does, it then kind of locks it in that hue, but I can change the saturation. So I'm going to go a little bit lower here to about, I would say about maybe 12. Doesn't have to be that precise. It can be 11. Then I'll go to the luminance, and I will just add a little bit of luminance to the shadows here. So that kind of infuse it with a little bit of warmth. Then I'll go to the midtones. I might want to add a little bit more warmth to that image. So again, the same process, click somewhere in the middle, press and hold the command key, and then I kind of move around the circle, looking for the color that kind of feels right for the midtones. So I would say somewhere around here in the orange color. And then again, the saturation, like the effect is too strong for me. So I want to lower the saturation. So I'm going to click on that dot and then move the saturation down. And then I'll go to the highlights. And here I kind of feel like I really want to try the blues. So if you familiar with the color theory, you kind of know like orange is opposite the blue. So I do play with the pairs, the complementary pairs when it comes to color grading. So I kind of, I'm like curious right away what that's going to look like. So, but at the same time, I might change my mind. This is something I'm keeping in mind. But once I kind of look around that circle, I might change my mind, because there might be something that I didn't even consider, something that looks much more interesting. So I think it's important to kind of stay open-minded too. I'm going to go the same process again. So just want to see some of the blues. Maybe actually I'm going to go for like highest saturation here just to see. Something here, lower it, and then add a little bit of luminance. I'm just gonna step away from the screen a little bit, just adding a little bit of luminance to the highlights. So this would be the before and after when it comes to color grading. So again, we're kind of infusing the image with a little bit more warmth and a little bit more atmosphere.
It's so subtle, but it really makes a difference.
And I think a lot of the time it is about making style changes, maybe like moving quite a few different tools, like moving them very slightly. So like it kind of gives the natural look to. Somewhere around here. Okay, so what is interesting, I mean, I only used 3 tools so far, which is the point curve, the color mixer, and the color grading, and I'm already happy. So it's like, sometimes, I mean, you know, I'm always curious and trying different tools and how they works, but at the same time, it just shows that sometimes even like few tools can do a really, really great job.
Yep.
So there is one more thing and one more technique I wanted to talk about here, because like I mentioned at the very beginning, I would like to talk a little bit more about light shaping in Lightroom in post-production. So this is a really good example to kind of add a little bit of creative light effect is what I kind of call it. And it's gonna work really well because, well, I kind of like adding it when I work with the backlight images. So I'm just gonna go to the masking now. And first of all, what I'm going to do is I do want to shape the light a little bit at the bottom and at the top of the frame. So the way I kind of works is kind of sometimes when we have something brighter in the scene, it can pull the attention to that brighter part. So I really want to darken this part, maybe darken this part a little bit to kind of draw the attention to what's the most important in the frame, which is our subject. So light shaping is a really great technique to kind of direct the attention to certain elements of the frame. And it doesn't have to be strong. It can be very subtle again. So in this particular example, I'm going to draw the linear gradient at the bottom. Oh, and a really good tip here, if you kind of look how I'm drawing it and I'm like, you know, kind of going on the right to the left, a really good tip if you want to draw it straight in a straight line. I'm just going to create a new mask. I'm going to create a new linear gradient. And then when I hold and when I press and hold the shift key and now draw the linear gradient, it draw it in a straight line. So that's just something we can do if we want it to be straight. And then I'm going to darken that part just a little bit, very, very subtle. A little bit more, very subtle, maybe a little bit more. And then I'll go and create a new mask here. And I'm going to draw that mask, that gradient on the top part. So again, shift key, just about here. And then I'm going to darken the exposure in that part of the image as well. And here, what I might also do is go to color and make that part just a little bit warmer so it kind of blends with the board. It's all about the details. And I might want to remove the mask from this orange and this orange. So if I undo, so this is the before, this is the after, I feel like I want to keep this orange and this part of the orange the same brightness that it was. So I'll click on that mask, click on subtract, and I'll grab a brush. And then I'll just brush. So if I kind of show you the mask overlay, you'll be able to see that I'm actually removing the mask from this part of the image. So
is this just a soft brush, soft round brush that you're using? Or?
Yes, this is the soft brush. So it is very feathered. I often actually notice that I use feathered brushes in my work. I guess maybe because for the type of work I do, they create a very natural, beautiful effect. So now the before and after. I might want to brush some of the effect back on the edge of that orange. So I'm just going to press and hold the Option key to brush that edge, brush a little bit more here so that it looks a little bit more natural. We don't have a very like hard transition when it comes to that adjustment. And now let's add some creative light to this image. And like I mentioned before, because it's a backlit image, it kind of it's a great opportunity for those type of creative effects. And I'll show you some more examples in a minute. In this particular example, I'll be using radial gradient. So I just want to add a little bit of extra light to some parts of the image. So here I will be adding two different type of radial gradients, one here and one here, just to like infuse the image with a little bit of like extra light. Light is a very eye-catching element. Usually we kind of are drawn to beautiful light. I think even in nature, right? When we see beautiful light, we kind of always draw attention to that. So
oh yeah, completely. It's, I mean, those moments, yeah, you kind of get that feeling inside of, it's like, oh, this is, you know, this is beautiful, this is gorgeous, and it can only really be created in nature, right? I mean, this is so.
That's true. So I do want to add a little bit of that extra, what I call magic, right, to this image. So I do want to add some exposure in that part. And at this point, I am paying attention to the histogram and making sure none of the important details are clipped. So I'm always kind of looking here as well. So adding a little bit of light, very feathered, so that it kind of looks very natural. Now this is a little bit too strong now, so I'll just go down. So again, just trying to infuse the image with something extra here, and then I'll go and create a new mask, another radial gradient, put it here, a little bit of light in that part, and also lighten some of the shadows. Now, what's also really great, whenever we use a few of the sliders in the masking panel, and then we feel like, oh, it's too strong now. And instead of like going back and readjusting a few of the sliders, we can use the amount slider, which is going that job for us. So it kind of reduces the amount, but we don't have to go and reduce all the sliders. So I really like using it. I'm going to do that. And now this is all about balancing, right? So it is about, okay, I added something, let me see the before and after, and then readjust to the point when it looks natural, but also adds something special to the photograph. So I'm kind of happy with this one. So it adds a little bit of a pop there, and it works well because of how many beautiful highlights there are in this image, and because of the backlighting technique. And then here, I also feel like it works. I'm kind of looking back. I notice I do that a lot when I edit my images, kind of looking from different distances. So at this point, that would be the before, and that would be the after of the image. Might want to go back and just reduce this one a little bit. And again, it is all about that balancing. And that's why, like I mentioned before, I do like to go back to those images after a little bit. You know, sometimes I'm not able to leave the image for a day or two, but if I can leave it for like half an hour, go back to it just to make sure. Especially if like I batch edit, so there are quite a few images that I go through. I think our eyes get used to the screen so much, and then it's good to have a break.
Yeah, well, especially doing such minimal and subtle adjustments. I think your eye definitely, like, especially like you said with the batch editing, it can get our eyes can get tired, right? Or they need the rest more than anything.
That's true. That is true. So that would be the before and after. And at this point, I'm pretty happy with it. And I would not make any more adjustments in this photograph personally. So again, leave it and then maybe come back to it and decide. When I photograph food, when I edit food, I do like to add a little bit of texture and clarity most of the time, and we will see examples of it in the next few photos. But it's really interesting because I really try not to use them anytime there are oranges in the photos, especially if we can like see the inside of the orange, because it then makes it look dry. And like I was mentioning at the beginning, they are all about that juiciness that makes
Right.
this particular food and ingredient delicious. So we don't want it to look dry. We want it to look juicy and delicious. So that's why I would not
Accomplished.
add this.
Accomplished. I think everybody in the chat is already hungry, so might be hard to keep it. You know, guys, get a snack while you're watching this. Okay, don't leave and go get food. Have a snack nearby.
Yes. Has anybody got any questions so far?
Let's see. It's a good time for questions. Well, we've got people coming in from the UK, from Toronto, so nice. Florida, the Netherlands, Texas, all over.
That's amazing. Well, do let me know if there are any questions. I'd love to answer if anybody has any questions. So I'll carry on with the light, creative light effect. So in a previous image, I showed 2 different radial gradients and how to add a little bit of something, especially to the backlit images or images that have some highlights in there. So we used radial gradients, but we can also use other tools to add that creative effect. And this image is already edited, so I only want to show how I would add that extra light to this particular image to show how we can use different tools to do that. So again, we're going to go to the masking, create a new mask, create a linear gradient. And here I am paying attention to where the shadows are. And I do want to draw that linear gradient with the direction of those shadows. So I'm going to draw it around here. This is going to be quite a quick edit. So we're adding a little bit of light. And it's going to work again here because this is like an outdoor image, so we would expect maybe that there is a little bit of light, maybe during the golden hour. So it's a good opportunity. So a little bit of light. And in this example, I'm also going to add a little bit of warmth there. And I'm going to go to the effects. And I'm going to move the dehaze slider to the left to kind of add that really atmospheric, beautiful haze. And at this point, the cakes start to look a little bit too bright. So I want to remove some of that light effect from the cakes. I'll go to the subtract, I'll grab a brush. And for this particular example, I'm going to reduce the flow to about 50. So I don't want to reduce all of the mask, all of the effect from the cakes, but only like some of it. So I'm only removing some of that mask from those cakes. So we're kind of bringing it back, but we're kind of adding that light effect. And again, once I kind of see the before and after, I can go back and maybe readjust the brightness a little bit and then draw it a little bit further. So again, this is just another tool to use for that creative light effect. So we can use the radial gradient, but we can also use the linear gradient like here. And another quick example would be here, and I've already applied this change. So I'll just share the before and after. So whenever there is any image, when there is maybe a little bit of window, it's really great to kind of add that light effect to infuse the frame with like something interesting. And again, always kind of paying attention to the histogram with those light effects. So like here, when I applied this adjustment, I kind of felt that this part of the windowsill was too bright. So I kind of reduced a little bit of exposure in that part. And one more tool that we can use to kind of add a little bit of light to the image is the brush. So this is going to be a really good example for the brush. So I'll just grab the brush here. The flow, I'm going to leave the flow at 50. And this is a really, brush is a really great tool whenever we want to add a little bit of extra light to some part of either what's on the plate or maybe some parts of our subject. So here we have those cakes, and I'm going to brush some parts of those cakes where I think it would be really nice to have like a beautiful glow, you know, when kind of the light hits the subject. And then
this
I'll
is
go.
all the fun parts of when you do a painting, is when you're painting the light and the highlights. You're just like, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's so true. And then add a little bit of that exposure here. I might brush a little bit more on this front one because it looks a little bit too dark. And again, that was already edited. So the image I already applied a little bit of contrast, and I adjust the color just a little bit, not too much. I'll show you the before and after, but the before and after when it comes to the brush. So we kind of add a little bit of glow here and make them a little bit more glowy. And that would be the before and the after.
Glowy is the official term, right? That's the light. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I made up, glowy. Yeah. So this is, so those are like few different tools that we can use and really have fun and play with different creative light effects in our images. And I think it is, like you said, fun because you kind of feel like you are painting on this image and adding a little bit of something, you know, more interesting in there too. But we can also use the light shaping tools and the light shaping techniques to draw attention to the main subject and to create a much stronger effect too. So something we've already talked about earlier in the session, and you asked if I think about editing when I create and, you know, think about what tools I'm going to use.
Right.
So this is one of those examples when I knew exactly what I was going to do in Lightroom when I was creating this image. And that often happens to me when I create images on a darker background. I kind of know, and this is a little bit too dark, actually. Like, it's not too dark, but even though, like normally what I would do, I would make my darker images even brighter in camera than this image. And then darken it in post-production, or darken the parts of it in post-production. So normally my dark images would look even brighter out of the camera. And then I would make sure that the darker parts get darkened in Lightroom. And then what I want to draw attention to, I kind of add some extra light in there.
Is that allowing you to kind of have more information when you go take it into the post-processing?
Yes, that's true. And you just want to make sure nothing is like underexposed, you're not losing any details. And it also gives you kind of more flexibility in post-production. Plus you can darken those parts in post-production. But then if you change your mind and you don't want it as dark, that's also something you can do later.
If you don't have that information when you go to, you know, if you don't have that in the photograph itself, you kind of, your hands are tied a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. So in this example, we are just going to draw the attention to that main subject here. So this is the raw file. Nothing has been edited here yet. And it's interesting because with my brighter work, I kind of start my editing process in the edit panel. And then I go to masking if I need it. With my darker work, I start with the masking, with the light shaping techniques, and then I go to the edit panel and do other adjustments if needed. So this is just interesting how sometimes different moods require a different creative process. So here I'll jump into masking. I'll grab a radial gradient. And in this radial gradient, I'm gonna draw it here. And actually, so I can invert it here, right? So I kind of can draw it, but there is also a simpler or like easier way to do it is I can create a new mask, create a radial gradient, and then press and hold the command key and then draw it, and it's drawing it inverted already.
Okay.
And then I do want it to be quite feathered because I'm gonna go for this like natural look. So I want it to be quite feathered. And I'm going to darken this image quite a bit. And maybe just give it that kind of faded look with the blacks. I want to make sure. So I'm clipping a little bit under the subject, as we can see with the blue, but that's fine because that's not really a super important detail, so I'm okay with that. So that's quite dark. And also I'm just quickly going to go back to this mask. And in this particular example, in the effects panel, I'm going to add a little bit of clarity. So one of the reasons why it would be important to sometimes apply different set of adjustments to the background and different set of adjustments to the subject is because not all adjustments, not all adjustments work well for both. So for example, with clarity, I mean, I went to 40. That is like quite a strong adjustment in my photos, but at the same time, it would not work for the subject itself. So if I applied that kind of clarity to the subject, it would again probably not look as delicious as I want it to look. So at this moment, the image looks really dark. So I do want to draw some attention to our main subject. I'm going to create a new mask. I'm going to create a radial gradient again. And here I'm going to draw it a little bit on the side because this part of the subject is a little bit darker. And draw it here. And now this is the most exciting part of the image. Now we're going to add a little bit of attention to this subject. So quite a strong adjustment here. Just paying attention to the histogram again. So when it comes to the light shaping, at this moment, I feel, yeah, that is somewhere where I want this image to be. That would be the before. And that's the after. No, this is the before. This is the after. So we kind of like putting a spotlight on our subject here.
Right.
And I do want to play a little bit more with the color, of course, just to add a little bit more attention to that subject and to make it stand out even more. So again, it's always about the light and the color. So let's go to the color panel. Go to the color mix, and we have a mixture of colors here. So I know we have a little bit of red and some orange. So I'll start adjusting, add a little bit of saturation to the reds, and move the red slightly towards magenta here. And I could also brighten it with the luminance slider. This is a really great slider to kind of draw the attention to the subject too. So it is a tool that I use for the light shaping, what I call, and the luminance slider. And then with the orange, I'll move the saturation up quite a bit here, actually. We only have like bits of orange. So let's make them more pronounced. So really looking at what details are important. So we're adding a little bit of color. Want to go back to the reds, the saturate, well, just reduce the saturation. We're just adding a little bit of pop here. And a really great color technique too is, so we kind of drawing the attention to the subject here by making it a little bit more vibrant. But at the same time, if we want to draw even more attention to it, and again, it will depend on the subject that we are photographing and on the image that we are editing. But sometimes if we kind of look around the photo, there might be other colors that kind of distract or compete with that color. And here I see quite a little bit of blue. So I have quite a little bit of blue in this image. So I'll go to the blue slider, and I just want to show what it's going to look like if there was more blue, to show how colors can compete with one another. So if I added more blue, I mean, this is crazy blue. But
some
what I wanted,
club lighting.
yeah, what I wanted to show here, what I really wanted to show here is that if we have a very strong, saturated, intense color somewhere, and it could be another element somewhere in the back of the frame, and it can distract from the main subject. So it is important to kind of look around what's in our photograph and see if there are any colors that are competing with one another, because we definitely don't want the color, this color kind of compete with the color of the main subject. But when I desaturate that color, kind of draws attention to the only vibrant color in this image. Now, I don't want to go that dark because we have a little bit of blue in the subject. So it is important to keep that blue, but I would say somewhere around here. So we're reducing the blue and drawing that attention a little bit more to the subject. I'm just going to do one more change here, one more adjustment with the masking. I'll create a new mask. I'll create a new radial gradient, and then I'm going to draw that radial gradient now more central on the subject. And then I'm going to add a little bit of contrast here. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit more. Again, always looking at the histogram. And then reduce the shadows a little bit more. And maybe even add some whites.
Annika's asking, these are figs, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
And do you source everything like locally near you? Are you ever like on a search for certain foods, or do you have places that you kind of go where that's like, okay, this is where I get my produce because it's always great, or like where, you know, how do you kind of go about sourcing all of those things? Because I'm sure you do a lot of it.
Yeah, like it's actually it's actually funny because everywhere I go, I either go with food or come back with food. You know, so if like I go and visit people, I go with food. And when I go and like, you know, go somewhere, I always come back with some produce or some ingredients. So I'm always on a, you know, on a look. There are obviously, I think like every person who is like a big foodie, they kind of know where their favorite produce is from. So there's a really lovely organic fruit and veg place here that I get my fruit and vegetables from. They always kind of like maybe not surprise me, but because they like very seasonal. So I'm always kind of like, oh, what's gonna be this week? In like, what are they gonna have today? Farmers market is a great place to source as well. And I actually
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to do a time check. We've got about 25 minutes left before we got to start wrapping up. Also, everybody watching on YouTube and Adobe Live, welcome. If you guys want to nominate yourself or anybody else to be on this show, click on the tab guest recommendations in the Behance chat, and please continue what you were saying. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, and I actually, so my parents grow food, and I have grown my own food too. Like bits and, you know, pieces in my garden, which is so satisfying and so lovely. So we have some like blueberry bushes in our garden and some like currants. So it is pretty cool. But yeah, going back to the image, I just added a little bit of contrast. So whenever we draw the attention to the subject, adding a little bit of light there, adding a little bit of contrast and making sure the colors look really like delicious, is going to kind of draw the attention to it. So this would be the before, very dark, and we can't really see the beautiful details of the subject. And then after, might be a little bit too powerful with the last mask. So I will just reduce that with the amount slider here.
No, I mean, obviously this is something you do, that you're amazing at it. Did food bring you to the photography, or did the photography bring you to the food, or was it kind of this happy marriage that happened in your life where, you know, you loved both things with cooking and baking, and like, what was kind of that process? Like, how did you get here?
So food was definitely first. My parents are huge foodies. They grew their own food. They still grow their own food. A lot of it in their garden, veg garden. So definitely food was first. And I kind of always felt I wanted to do something with food, but I didn't know what it was gonna be. So at some point I thought, well, maybe it is going to be just a hobby, and that's fine, you know. But then photography kind of came to my life a little bit unexpected, because I didn't buy the camera with intention to photograph food. I bought camera with intention to capture our travels and like some of the family moments. But because I've always baked and cooked a lot, I kind of naturally started, you know, photographing what was around the kitchen. And then it is actually very interesting, because when I found out that there are people who actually specialize in food photography, I was like, what? Like, there are people who actually photograph food? Like, tell me more. Yeah, so it was interesting because I didn't know, like, I obviously knew somebody must photograph food because, you know, food is all around us. But at the same time, I didn't know that people specialize in just that one subject.
Well, I think you found your calling.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you have a cookbook as well, right? That you have with your photography in it. And is it your recipes as well, or?
It's a photography book. So it is tips and tricks. There is no recipes there. So it is all about food photography, which, you know, is a subject I could talk about a lot. Right.
We got to do a longer stream. We got to get you back on here.
Yes, please have me back. I would love that. So going back with the theme of colors, and like I was mentioning, whenever we want to draw attention to something, we want to make sure it has beautiful colors. And at the same time, anything that kind of competes with that color, we can desaturate slightly and make it less louder. So this is how I kind of think about colors. You know, if some colors feel too loud in the image, then we want to make them a little bit less loud. So in this particular example, I mean, this is such a flat looking image. It was taken during the overcast day. So the light was very, very flat. And so I really want to like add a little bit more. I just want to add a little bit more that tonal contrast that was missing. And we already see that the greenery around is quite vibrant. We have very vibrant greens here in England, and I'm sure those of you who joining from England kind of can confirm that we have very vibrant greens. So I'm already kind of looking and thinking we will have to desaturate those greens a little bit, make them a little bit less attention grabbing. So I will go to the light panel again and start in the point curve and create that tonal contrast here. I'm going to lift that end. So what that kind of does is just adds that beautiful fade to the photograph, then drop it. in the shadows, then lift it in the midtones. And now one thing I'm noticing already here, like, of course, colors, right? We see the green is like really, really strong now. And now if I'm gonna refine, of course, it's gonna refine all the colors. But one thing I noticed, which I'm like, I'm not sure about this, is that when I'm deepening the shadows, it kind of makes the background behind very dark. And I'm losing some of the details there. And it is blurry. It is a shallow depth of field. But at the same time, I feel like it is a little bit too dark now. But I do like the shadows on this side of the subject. So if I now try and lift that, I get my details back here, but now the subject kind of looks a little bit flat. So this point curve kind of don't work for the entire image. I would need like to do something else with it. So I am going to edit this image, kind of the subject and the background separately. So I'm going to delete this channel. And then I'm going to go to the masking and create two different masking. And that's one of the reasons why we sometimes need to apply a different set of adjustments to the subject and a different set of adjustments to the background. Right. Because the same set of adjustment might not work for both. So I am going to create a background mask. And then I can create the point curve in the background only. So this is actually one of the new features that we have in Lightroom. So we now have the point curves in the masking. So we can apply those adjustments to specific parts of the image, which is super cool. So that's what I'm going to do. So darken it here, but not too much. So adding a little bit of contrast, but you can actually see I'm not adjusting the subject at all. I'm only applying those adjustments to the background.
When you applied the background mask, did it automatically kind of figure out where the background was? Did you, because I saw you click that on. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, okay. So I can actually, so if I show you the mask overlay, that's what it shows me as a background. And it adds the plate here too. I could always remove the plate if I needed to. So I will see how I go and apply those adjustments. If I feel that something is off, I might go click on subtract, subtract it, subtract that mask from the plate. So kind of have that on those details back in the background. And I can even make it a little bit more faded, because I don't have to worry that the subject is going to be too faded. And then once I'm happy with those adjustments, I can go and create a new mask and then select a subject. And then I can create a new point curve here. So here I can add a little bit of contrast. Bring it back here, then. So we have like two slightly different curves. So that would be the subject. So now that I'm like kind of separating the subject from the background, so like really separating it from the background, this would be the before and this is the after. The tonal contrast is pretty good. I can go and start readjusting the colors. So I could use the refine saturation here. So I don't want to reduce the saturation for the subject. But if I wanted to reduce the saturation of the green, I could also do it here in this point curve in the background mask. But I do want to go to the edit panel, and I do want to do it in the color panel in the color mix, because I feel like with the greens, we can also change the hue a little bit there. So I'll go to the greens, desaturate those greens quite a bit. So we just really, and if I kind of go really down, you can see how it draws the attention to the oranges in this, to the orange colors in this image. There is no oranges here. So I don't want to obviously desaturate it too much, but then I do want to apply a little bit of that blue here. So I'm really trying to draw the attention more to the subject. And then I can go to the orange color and add just a touch of saturation here, not too much. So I feel like the colors look much more balanced now. There is no green competing with the orange colors. And this would be a good example to add a little bit of clarity and texture because of, first of all, clarity to the background to kind of make some of the details pop a little bit more, and also some texture to the subject because we have this beautiful texture here. So I'll go ahead and go back to the masking. So we kind of go back to two different masks again. We will be applying at different amounts of those settings to two different parts. So I'll go ahead and go to the subject first, go to the effects, go to the clarity, a little bit more clarity and a little bit of texture here. And I might actually go to the light panel and add a little bit more exposure, making sure I'm not making this part too bright. And then what I'm also noticing here is that we have a little bit of green in this part. Oops, that was a little bit too. Everybody probably saw this. So we have a little bit of green here happening. So this is reflected from the surroundings. So I might want to go to the green point curve and see if we can maybe fix that with this curve. So we have the green curve. If I'm pulling it down, I'm adding, as we can actually see on the orange colors, I'm adding a little bit of magenta here. So it kind of reduces the green. But I also want to pay attention so that the orange is not looking too, still looks natural to the color I want it to be. So the green is kind of reduced now. And if I wanted to reduce the green in the color mix, it would reduce all the greens, right? So I'm just trying to do it locally. But at the same time, I'm not sure about what the cake look like. Like, I feel like this orange is a little bit too red now. So I'll just quickly go back to the color panel and make those oranges, move the orange hue more towards the yellow to make sure it looks natural. And then if I go back to background, I can add some of the clarity here. So I'll add a little bit of clarity. And then really, actually, when we're in the effects panel, a new also for me, slider and the adjustments that I have been playing more with is the grain. So we used to have the grain, and we still have the grain in the edit panel, but now we also have the grain slider in the effects panel. So I have been playing more with it. And I noticed that it works really well whenever we kind of want to add a little bit of texture. And also, I feel like it works really well whenever I'm working on images and I want to give them that a little bit of like a vintage vibe, cinematic vibe. So I feel like it's going to work really well here. And I'm going to go a little bit closer. And I hope everybody will be able to notice if I move the grain slider. I'm not sure if it's, oh, yeah, it is visible.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can really see it in the background with the foliage. You can kind of see that grain kicking in.
Because I'm adding it to the background layer.
Oh, okay.
So
You're in the
that's the
background. Yeah, well, that would make sense.
but this is the thing with food. If I wanted to add the grain to the entire image, it might make food look a little bit like, grainy, so it kind of losing the texture. Texture is an important visual details that kind of indicates what something is going to taste like. So we want to make sure it has a beautiful texture. So what I like and what I have been playing with, and I'm really new to it myself, is that how can I apply that grain to the background, but still make the image look natural, but at the same time, not add this grain to the subject, right? So just like playing with this new adjustment here in the masking panel. So we now have the grain in the masking panel.
Alessandra Lopez had a quick question, which might tie in with the textures, especially the food. She's wondering, what was a food that is maybe surprisingly difficult to work with or photograph, or something that is, that you're going to have to put in a little extra work to kind of get what you want?
Great question. Any type of food that doesn't last long on set. So any type of food that you only have few minutes before it starts changing the shape, the color, because for example, it cools down. So one of the examples could be anything with like melted cheese, right? So after a bit, like at first, when you prepare anything with like melted cheese, those very first few minutes are crucial to capture the deliciousness of that subject. If you leave it for too long, it'll start losing that delicious, like it will still be delicious, but from the photography perspective, you only have the first few minutes to capture it before it kind of changes, right? So I would say any type of food that loses the texture or the shape, the color, and doesn't last long on set, and you've got to be really quick. That's always kind of challenging. And a really good tip here, and of course there are a lot of tips, but one of the tips could be to compose the image and get everything ready before, and then have some type of, could be even like a prop, put it in there where the subject would be, kind of make sure the light and the setup is ready. And then once the food is ready, you don't have to worry about all the surroundings. So that's just one of the tips.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like you said, with cheese and other types of obviously frozen desserts or anything like that, the sheen, the kind of, of that food or texture can changes so quickly. I'm imagining cheese of just how it starts as oxygen's hitting it. It kind of starts to get this it starts to harden a little bit, or kind of, it's turning from this like really lush kind of liquid to this like hardened kind of plastic. Like it doesn't taste that way, obviously, but
no,
I can see how the lighting would impact that.
But I think that's the key in food photography. That visual aspect is so important. Because, if you're there, you can always smell the delicious aroma anyway, which is gonna kind of, or you can try it and oh, it's good, With food photography, it's so interesting because we can look at something and immediately come to the conclusion whether that's gonna be tasty or not. Immediately. Like, it's so fascinating. Like we immediately know if something is fresh or not just by looking at it. And with food, particularly with like food photography, that visual aspect is so important.
Yeah, and like I said, it's something that we kind of all innately have, right? It's how we survive as animals and humans, is like to know what we should put in our mouth and not. And it really is kind of an interesting art form that it has its own place, like there's not a lot of other things that are like it. I was saying product photography, it's a very similar thing, but because this is something that doesn't stay well for long. Like, you could shoot shoes. Well, that shoe's probably going to look the same the next day, in packaging than it would that day. And with this, it's so temperamental. It is a really, really beautiful kind of act that's happening.
Yeah, that's true. So I just added a little bit more exposure to this image, not too much. And then one last thing I want to do is I want to go to the color mixer one more time and reduce some of the yellow and see how that's going to affect this image. I think it looks much better. And we're pretty much done here. So there is a couple more really exciting images that I wanted to share. And I think we have like 15 minutes, right? So.
Well, we got a little less than that. I would say we've got about 10 minutes before we're completely done. I would, in about 5 minutes, we'll start wrapping up, but we can stretch that a little bit. So.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so just like a few more tips and tricks that I wanted to share with everybody. So we had this example that we worked on. And so one way to kind of add interest also to food images is to kind of add a little bit of context. And that context could be some kind of sense of space, you know, where like something a little bit, for example, like here, we don't really have any context when it comes to the place where the image was taken. So it is interesting to add, we've frozen.
Oh, we're back.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we back?
Yeah, I can see it. So I think we're back. We're okay.
I'm not sure if anybody can hear me. Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yes, I think everybody seems like picture and audio is okay.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. So it is interesting technique to kind of add a little bit of context there if we can, like in this image that we've just edited. There is another example here. So just adding a little bit of context, or even it could be, you know, a little bit more of a table or like a little bit of a space there, just to add a little bit of context. And another technique, which kind of adds a little bit of interest and just adds a little bit more life to our images, is adding a human element. So the sense of space, then the human element kind of adds a little bit something like more interesting to the photograph. That's one of the examples. And something I wanted to actually share with like the human element, especially, that's when we really want to make sure we editing and masking separate elements, because let's say we want to make the image a little bit more cooler, but we don't want the hands to look too cool. So we just want to add a little bit of like masking there, make sure that the hands look the color that we want it to look. So I'll just do it very quickly here. This image was already edited. So I'll just grab the objects in this instance. And like if I brush it, it masks it automatically. So I'll do it here. And I'll do it here. Okay, missed a little bit up there. Okay, now that's a little bit too much. So I'm going to subtract with a brush and just subtract it from here. Maybe with a flow 100. So one more time. And now just to make sure the hands look natural, I'll go to the color and like add a little bit of warmth here. So I initially cooled down this image because I wanted it to evoke that cool winter morning, but it just didn't work for the hands. So I wanted to apply a different set of adjustments here. So that's why the selective adjustments are so powerful, because we can really play with those different moods and different stories here. And whenever there is a person there, the masking also has an option to kind of mask a person. So it will now detect that person in an image, and then we can either apply the mask to the entire. Are you okay?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just want to make sure. Want to make sure you're right. So we can either add a mask to the entire person, or we can really choose the elements that we want to apply adjustments to. So that's also super great if we just want to apply different masks to different elements. Or also we have an option. So I'm going to cancel this. In a preset panel, we also have the adaptive premium presets. So the adaptive means we can apply presets to a portrait, or for example, to a sky or to a subject. So that means I am only adding that adjustment to the person. So those are actually small adjustments. Here, what I might want to do is add a little bit of texture to my own hair.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really cool way to do things quicker, and also to be very selective and apply adjustments to certain elements that we want to apply adjustments to. So I'll just click and apply. And also we have the amount. So if I want it to be more textured or less textured in this example, I can do that. So just wanted to show this because it's such a cool feature. So whenever we kind of have a person in the image, first of all, it kind of adds something to the story. So we can have like a set of different images, and then one of them has a human element, and that could be person preparing the food. That could be person holding something. And by holding, we also kind of draw attention to that recipe, to that food we are photographing. So it's just, this is such a great, cool way to apply adjustments much quicker and also with more precision. So that's why that's something I really wanted to show here. And in this particular example, I would probably leave it as it is. So if I like wanted to maybe like, I kind of feel like the textured hair worked really well. The only probably thing I would personally do is go to the color panel here, to the masking color panel. So once we apply this mask, it'll show in the masks panel. So if we ever want to make any other adjustments to this specific element, like say, for example, hair, I can do it in the masking panel. So it will be applied there. So I can go and go to color and just make my hair a little bit less yellow. That's just personal preference, and maybe a little bit brighter
like going
too.
Green or blue, maybe some violet.
No, yes, that's true. That's true. We could. So this is just like a really, really cool feature to play with. Highly recommended. And one more thing that I wanted to show on the desktop is the movement photo. So we had this sense of space, like adding a little bit of context, then adding a human element that kind of makes our images more lived in. And then movement is another great technique to add something interesting to our photos, kind of add that eye-catching factor. The only thing with the movement, whenever we photograph movement with in food photography with natural light, we need to think about what kind of shutter speed we are using. And sometimes we need to use higher shutter speed. And then depending on the subject we are photographing, if we want to, choose the aperture that kind of keeps all the details that we want to be in focus, sometimes that means compromising on the ISO, which can create grain in our images that kind of have the movement in. So if I kind of zoom in, I'm a little bit like, ooh, I don't want to zoom in. I don't want anybody to see that grain. But this is quite a grainy photograph here. So the great thing, though, is that we can remove it pretty quickly here. So adding this movement is, first of all, super fun to play with. So, and with food, we have so many different opportunities to add that movement, right? We can drizzle things, we can pour things, we can sprinkle things. So there is so many opportunities when it comes to food photography to use movement. So even if sometimes we need to compromise and like put the ISO a little bit higher, which means, a little bit of grain in the image, we can tackle this in the edit panel. We can go to the details. And we can use the new Denoise feature in Lightroom, which reduces the noise in images. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that very quickly.
Okay. And I think I'm going to have to wrap up after that. So please show us this final thing here. Cool.
So this is how powerful that is.
Wow.
I mean, we can still play with the amount, which is really, really great. But that's, you know, how powerful that is. So it kind of shows me I have the estimated time here, 40 seconds if I want to click on enhance. I know we need to wrap up, but I just really wanted to show. So we can just like play with the amount slider and see where we kind of feel like it looks natural for our image. So I am gonna.
Yep. Yeah, that's an incredible feature. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful having you on this on this live stream. We are here with Bea Lubas, creating moods and telling stories with your photography, obviously in Lightroom. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, chat, for being here from all over the world. We've got your links on here. We know where to find you. Thank you so much. Join us next with Anna McNaught and learn how to create a day to night scene and build glow in your images from scratch in her new show, Magic in Photoshop. Bea, thank you so much. It was wonderful having you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. That was so much fun to show, you know, how we can add a little bit more interest to our images in Lightroom.
It was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Stick around.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.